Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think I've got this worked out. I was here at the track yesterday and covered much of the same items. And I may not dwell too much on the exact words on the slides because what I really want to do is kind of give you just an update on where we are on some of the regional transportation discussions and planning and decision making. And it also strikes me that some of these slides I may have given you all in a retreat maybe earlier this year or so, but I just wanted to remind everybody that, one entity that is kind of new since maybe certainly since I started working here and we began having these conversations is the revamped Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority. And in the 2017 legislative session, that became a different focus of 5 counties from Hernando down to Manatee County with an emphasis on transit. And TBARTA's legislation already enables broad powers and duties and responsibilities with the exception that it doesn't have any financial support or revenue generating ability. So that's kind of a big caveat. But other than that, it can do a lot of things. And one of the interesting things about the TBARTA legislation is they've been asked to prepare a regional transit development plan. And we've been having some conversations with their staff about what that is. I know they've engaged a lot of different consultants. They've engaged Cassandra. They've engaged a lot of people in a conversation about what a regional transit development plan should look like. We're of the opinion at the MPO, and I think Cassandra shares this perspective, and PSTA staff in general, that they shouldn't be reinventing the wheel, but they really should be looking at an implementing document, an implementing plan that takes plans and service development concepts that are already in MPO adopted plans or already in a regional priority list or coming out of the Tampa Bay Regional Premium Transit Feasibility Plan and figuring out a way to advance those projects to implementation and to operate. And TBARTA does have the ability to operate transit. So I think that's part of the conversation they're having. Their board is going to be having a workshop retreat to really look at the staff roles, responsibilities, and capabilities to take on this new mandate. In addition to that, we have another organization that focuses on 3 counties within those 5 counties, and that's the Transportation Management Area Leadership Group. And TMA, or Transportation Management Area, is a federal term for the urbanized area and over 200,000 population, and that's us. So we have the 3 MPOs that get together about 5 times a year. We have 3 representatives from the MPO. Commissioner Tonga is one of our representatives from each of those MPOs, and we set regional transportation priorities. Now, when I say set, the TMA is an advisory body to the 3 MPOs. So we make recommendations to each of the MPOs, and then each of the 3 MPOs adopts formally the regional transportation priority list. And that's been happening now for a couple of years, probably going on 3 years now. In addition to all that, the big question as we think about regional transportation planning and transit planning is what is the definition of the region, because yet there's another organization out there called the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee, which is a committee of TBARTA, and that is an 8-county region that includes Sarasota and Citrus and Hernando. Interestingly, Manatee and Sarasota, that's 1 MPO. Citrus and Hernando, that's 1 MPO. Polk is another MPO. We have FDOT District 1 in Polk and Manatee, Sarasota, and District 7 in Hillsborough and Pinellas going north. Different regional planning councils. So there's a lot of overlap here that is frankly confusing, does make your head hurt a little bit. But this is the framework in which we operate, and it's a lot of fun most of the time. So in thinking about speaking with one voice at the regional level, which seems to be what everybody wants to be able to do, we've got to kind of break down some of these different structures and figure out what the right decision-making framework is for our region. The TMA leadership group is developing regional priorities, focusing on major cross-county travel patterns, and really helping define that ask for FDOT every year and the legislature and maybe the federal government on what our region needs. And you can see the representatives that we have on the TMA from Ford Pinellas. I do think that there's a lot of benefits of looking at the merger of MPOs, which is a conversation that we're having. And also, I think the role of T-BARDA is beneficial in having one overarching regional voice for transit that can advance specific projects. And the idea is to figure out if this region can commit to 3 to 5 regional priorities and really look at how that supports our regional economic growth, regional economic opportunity, and provide those connections to the transit services that are being delivered and developed in each county. And I think that relationship is really critically important. And that's why all of our operators, all of our transit providers, all of our planning organizations need to be really looking at the linkage between the regional investments that we may be moving forward and how that relates to service at the county level. So some of the challenges are, what are the roles, mission roles and responsibilities of all these different organizations? And I think the inability to advance transit at a regional level, regional scale in this area hasn't really been from a lack of planning or really a lack of vision. We've had vision plans, we've had plenty of plans. It's primarily been a lack of funding and a lack of a commitment to funding. And that's not just putting that on the shoulders of the local governments, which DOT often does. It's also that DOT's funding mechanisms aren't really ideally suited to fund regional transit projects. For instance, the strategic intermodal system is the big dog of transportation funding in Florida. It funds the interstate development program. It funds major roadways like US 19 and Gandy Boulevard and a few others. And the SIS is limited to roadways or intermodal facilities like ports and airports and isn't eligible for any transit unless it's fixed guideway and exclusive lane. And even then, it's kind of hard to do. And I'll talk about another funding source, I think, later on in this slide, transportation, well, maybe I don't have it on this, but another funding source is the Transportation Regional Incentive Program, which at one point was a great regional transit funding source or transportation funding source, could be used for transit. It was $227 million in 2007. It's now down to less than $5 million in 2017. So we just haven't committed at the state level or at the local level to fund a regional transit. Some other issues we have to look at is equity between counties and local governments. The MPO merger question is getting real interesting because Pasco County is in public forums stating that they're not going to support a merger of MPOs if they don't have equal representation to Hillsborough and Pinellas. And they have half the population of Pinellas and less than half the population of Hillsborough. And whether we agree with that or not, I can see at least one county not agreeing with that. So we have some challenges there. And we really have to think about how we relate to the different structures in place. We have 24 municipalities here in Pinellas. We do countywide land use planning. That's not the case with the MPOs in Hillsborough and Pasco. You probably have seen this slide before, but I think it's helpful just to talk about when we think about regional planning and integrated transit planning and MPO planning, there are really 4 areas that we have to really focus on, and that is the funding, which really starts with a vision, but we think about all the different roles and responsibilities of what to fund and how to fund it, governance so that there's clear roles of decision-making, process, how do we align our plans and our services, and then evaluation. How do we determine what's effective? How do we determine who's being served? And what are the different roles and responsibilities of these different organizations? And I've been real clear in everything I've said over the last 2.5 years here that we need a compelling vision to let the public see what we're trying to accomplish so that they can see themselves benefiting from what we're trying to accomplish. An alignment with regional economic development is critical. And every survey that we've ever taken of elected officials about this issue of regional transportation, the #1 issue is align it with regional economic development. Align it with economic development, align it with economic development. So we've heard that message very clear. And then we've also heard from others, Commissioner Eggers is a real strong proponent of this, is making sure we keep that link between local community-based outreach and engagement and the regional decision-making process. It can't be removed. It can't be seen as some other governmental agency telling local governments what they need to be doing. So we've got to figure out that relationship. We have just kicked off a project. We had the kickoff meeting last Friday through TBARTA as a contracting agency. They've hired a consultant firm called Stantec with the sub-consultant of the USF Center for Urban Transportation Research to look at a best practices study of regional planning and regional governance, best practices, and they'll be developing recommendations. And that is specifically looking at how do we strengthen our overall regional transportation planning process, and how do we potentially merge one or more MPOs in our region, and the focus there is on the 3 Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas MPOs. And they're going to be defining what successful regional coordination means for Tampa Bay by looking at other practices from around the country. And a big caveat, and this came up in our kickoff meeting last Friday, is that other states, so if we look to the Salt Lake City region or the Minneapolis Twin Cities region or Denver or Seattle or wherever, they have different state enabling legislation. They have different funding sources. They have different roles that the legislatures in those states have given to MPOs and to transit agencies. And we can't just take that and plop it down on our set without considering similar statutory arrangements. So that's an important consideration. The other thing that my colleague over in Hillsborough County, Beth Alden, has emphasized in this effort is that we can't just be looking at the 3 counties, because from a media market, from a commuting pattern, from a density standpoint, we're bigger than just the 3 counties. And if we want to compete for federal transportation dollars, or federal dollars regardless of transportation, maybe we need to be looking at a larger region, because many of our other regions that we're competing with are 6, 8, 10 counties. A big difference, though, is that out west, generally your counties are bigger. So if we look at the Phoenix area or we look at San Diego, it's not real fair, because that's 1 county for San Diego, 1 county for Phoenix, and I think 1 county for Salt Lake City too. So it's just bigger out west in general, so we got to be careful about that. So they'll be executing this scope, and originally the idea was to have this done in time for the legislative session to at least make some recommendations that the legislature could consider. That's now been thrown out of the window, and we're now looking at December of 2018 for this regional governance study to be done. So we're going to be taking our time, and frankly, the legislature is not really the audience for this. It's between the MPOs and the governor, whether we merge. And when I asked the consultants and TBARTA who's the audience for this study, their first response was the TBARTA board, and we said, nope, wrong answer. It's not the TBARTA board, because they really don't have a say in whether the MPOs merge. It is the MPOs. It is the county commissions. It is the Florida legislature to a degree, because they can change statutes or funding and really hurt us if they don't like what we're doing. But it's the governor too. So we've got to keep in mind there's a lot of different audiences out here. So with that backdrop, there's an important input to this. And then before I go here to the regional transit feasibility plan, I want to stop and see if anybody has any questions about the MPO governance issue. Yes, sir.
If I may.
Please.
You mentioned that funding starts with a vision and then went on to say must be aligned with economic development, probably. But it's articulating that to the community as at large that I think is the biggest challenge. That the people that understand it already understand it, but they're not the public at large that has to support it.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a huge amount of messaging involved in whatever ask we ever want to make to the public. I agree. Anything else? All right. So the Regional Premium Transit Feasibility Plan is being led by the Hillsborough Area Transit Authority, HART, with funding from FDOT. It's $1 million plus planning effort. This is a very truncated version of the presentation, but this is a good takeaway slide because we've had a lot of plans, and the only one that's really advanced to the federal process is the Central Avenue Bus Rapid Transit project that was just submitted. So kudos to PSTA for that. So over the past 30 years, we've really not seen a lot of success. What's different, and this is significant, is DOT really finally has skin in the game, substantial skin in the game. And not just through this study, through other things that I'll talk about in a moment. But I think because DOT is initiating the study at the request of the TMA leadership group, by the way, then I think we've really got some traction that we never had before, and we've got a big partner, a supportive partner in FDOT that we didn't necessarily have before. The purpose of this plan is to really look at what transit projects of regional significance have the greatest potential to be funded by the federal government and by the state government, because there's a partnership there. If the feds commit 50%, the state will commit 25%, and the locals are on the hook for 25% of the capital cost. And also, the state wants to make sure that the locals have a commitment for ongoing operations. We can talk about that a little bit further. Projects that are the most forward-thinking and make the best use of today's technology and emerging technology, and projects that best serve our region today while supporting tomorrow's growth. And we are a growing region. Contrary to what I hear sometimes in Hillsborough County, we're growing too. So these are the steps in the regional process: data collection, market evaluation, all that's kind of done. And we're now at a point where this consultant team has defined priority corridors, essentially, for transit. And now they're moving into step 2, which is to look at phasing capital and operating costs of the different options to bring forward a specific recommendation. So we are kind of down here in the step 2 evaluation and return on investment right now, although we haven't done all the details in all these steps. So we're going to circle back to station locations and things like that as we go forward. So this is the regional transit vision that's emerged. It's not a great surprise to many of us who've been doing this work in this region for a long time, but the primary corridor is what you see in blue, and it is from Wesley Chapel in Pasco County down through the USF area, downtown Tampa, West Shore, the Gateway area, and St. Petersburg, with a spur over to Clearwater, generally following through the Gateway, East Bay area. And then you can see the Central Avenue BRT corridor down here. Those lighter lines in blue are supporting corridors or supporting connections that are still part of that regional vision. And you can see things like waterborne transportation over here, the CSX corridor, the US 19 corridor, the Veterans corridor, Courtney Campbell, which would be the TIA to Clearwater Beach Express. All of these things are part of the system plan, essentially, in this vision. But this central blue corridor is the one that the consultants feel has the best chance of success in terms of the rating that you go through when you seek Federal Transit Administration funds. And that's because it touches our major activity centers, our jobs, our population densities, and things like that. So as we evaluate these, the things they're looking at is that preliminary FTA rating, and you want to at least be at the medium level, and we're kind of at that medium level. Return on investment, what kind of revenue streams can we generate from that? What kind of economic development does that foster? What are the impacts? What are the benefits in terms of ridership, population, things like that? And what does the public think of it? And I won't go into all the details, but this is a list of the technical rankings that have emerged from this. This is really showing that rubber tire in exclusive lane is the top-ranked option because it has a lower cost, but it serves that market about as well as anything else. Light rail has a higher cost, but you can do more economic development around light rail generally. But all those projects you can see generally serve the same corridor, at least the ones at the top. Further down you can see West Shore to Brandon, more of an east-west corridor, the Clearwater Gateway corridor, and then some of the CSX alignments. From public opinion standpoint, and this is a summary of workshops held in Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, light rail emerged as a higher mode preference, but generally about the same. And so what they're evaluating and what garnered the highest ranking are those 1 through 5 projects, and a couple of them are tied. So they're still kind of sorting through the light rail, rubber tire, commuter rail mode options. Now this will all come to a head or to fruition, hopefully, in January when we have our next TMA leadership group meeting. Actually, it's not our next meeting, but it'll be the next significant TMA meeting, where we will be having about a 2-hour workshop on phasing and segments, cost components for operating and capital for that vision plan. And what's interesting about this is this corridor from downtown St. Petersburg up to Wesley Chapel is about 45 miles. And the longest application in the federal New Starts program, the Federal Transit Administration's program, is about 20 miles, and I think that's Phoenix. So, and that was an aberration. So we probably need to figure out a way to break this down into a more manageable project. And I think what we have to determine is who's going to be most ready for that one project to go forward, because it's really going to be where the commitment is for local funding. It might be in Hillsborough, it might be in Pinellas. It probably won't be in Pasco, because Pasco is going to depend on a jobs destination in Hillsborough or Pinellas. So that's what January is going to be sorting out for us, is breaking this down into something more manageable. And then we're going to have a big conversation. And the big conversation is, how do we fund the ongoing operations? What kind of a commitment is DOT looking for? Because here's the big news that just came out in their tentative work program. DOT has programmed the next phase of this project, which is the engineering design phase and the environmental phase, which you just went through with your Central Avenue BRT project. And that's about a $4.5 million funding request. And DOT could have put that at the end of the work program. They could have put that out in 2023. They funded that in 2019. So they're serious. They're serious as a heart attack about making this happen. But they want to make sure that there's a commitment to carry that forward. And we don't know what DOT is looking for exactly, but I suspect it's something like Sunrail, where they had a memorandum of agreement among the local governments that after a certain period, if you keep going down this path and we get the dollars, we will commit to maintain it. We will commit to operating this system. So DOT has asked me, how do we have that conversation? Is it at the TMA level, or is it the county by county level? And I think you got to start probably at the county by county level and then have it at the TMA level. But I think we probably are looking at a May, June workshop in Pinellas County, particularly with the county commission, but with some of the larger cities, about what's our strategy, what do we really want to do here? Because if we say we're not interested, DOT will take that $5 million and move away from it.
Can you define what the difference between light rail and commuter rail is, so that, because if they were combined, then that would be like numero uno in terms of the methodology that's most
Sure. The simplest way to think about it is that commuter rail generally is a faster mode, and it has fewer stations, and it generally covers a longer distance. It's a different type of technology. It uses a different guideway. Light rail is meant maybe more for a more urban environment. It tends to have more stops along the way, and it's a lighter vehicle, and it doesn't have as quite the impact. But from all intents and purposes for the I-275 corridor, they're probably interchangeable. It's a question of how many stations you want and how it operates at more of a pedestrian level. Commuter rail is what Sunrail is in Orlando. Very limited stops. It tends to be peak period focused, like AM, PM commuting peaks, and it's a long corridor. Light rail tends to be more like the streetcar, urban systems that you see. Even in Phoenix, it's a 20-mile light rail system, but it has a lot of stops, and it goes fairly slow through a dense urban environment. 35, 40 miles an hour, pretty typical.
Ms. Andrew, do you have to say something?
Well, you will be restricted with the technology based on the corridor that you use. You would not be able to commingle light rail with freight rail. So if the corridor was a freight rail corridor, you would have to use a crash-worthy vehicle like what would be considered a commuter rail.
Locomotive type.
Yes. And as Whit mentioned, the urban is you can commingle light rail with other vehicles like cars. So some of it is your ultimate vision is critical to the choice of technology. But I wouldn't get too wrapped around technology at this point, because I would be more concerned about the corridor and the service and what you're trying to provide, and then make sure that the technology fits.
this could be too complicated, but let me just kind of blurt it out. From the standpoint, I'm looking at this two ways. The first way is, of course, we're having a planning meeting here today. So how does this affect that planning meeting? And we've heard some, and that's not the main part of what I want to talk about, but I just want to bring the focus of that back to here. So we've got things that we want to get accomplished over the next, 1 to 4 years, perhaps. And this was really a premium study that was very interesting. I'll get into this later, about coming from FTA, from the Department of Transportation, funding this study. So as we look at this, and I'll let you just comment about that, and I'd come back to my second part, is what might come out of this. The real part that would affect us from a planning side would
Sure.
be out there at a number of years.
Well, the genesis of this study was CSX approached FDOT. They didn't tell us about it, but they approached DOT, and then they approached the MPOs because DOT didn't say anything. We want to sell our CSX rail tracks. And DOT said, well, hold on a minute. Don't get too excited about that. If you go talking about buying the CSX tracks, we're not sure we want to do that. And secondly, we need to look at all the options because that may not be the best investment. So that was the genesis of it. So where this kind of means something from a planning standpoint is we're picking corridors and we're deciding where to make an investment. And none of this will happen if we don't put it in our long-range transportation plan.
No, I'm sorry, for PSTA, we're in a planning session right now for PSTA. So how does that affect PSTA for us over the next 1 to 3 years or 4 years?
I don't think it affects you at all for the
It
next
doesn't.
1 to 3 years,
Yeah.
other than it's something to kind of be working toward and thinking about.
Now, let me talk about the good stuff.
Longer term, it
Yeah.
means you're going to need to maybe look at orienting service to feed whatever is here and connect it elsewhere throughout the county.
Now, the big stuff, okay, and this is just a little bit of input from me, and this is just meant for the people on the planning side, but it's a big compliment to it. I was at the TMA when they came down with we'll call it the railroad presentation, and from that point in time, this is so complicated. I went to the academy, Bill's been to the academy as well. I'm not sure anybody else has been. but
MPOAC.
The MPOAC, where you try to figure all of this stuff out. It's so complicated from a funding standpoint. You know, and you guys from the PSTA know that in spades as well. And WIT has somehow managed to try to get all of this going with this premium study, so we didn't get into predetermination of that corridor and what we might have been trying to do there. And we had 55 or 57 plans that have gone nowhere. And so we're trying to get a plan that goes somewhere. And WIT is trying to work in a period where we had MPOs. Fortunately, we did have the TMA that had just started, and that's worked up to this point in time. But now we have T-BARTA, which is some more counties as well. And when you're looking at planning and trying to get funding for this, it was very interesting how we talked Department of Transportation, and then we have this word of transit. And what's the relationship between transportation and transit? And I don't know, Whit, if you want to make any comments about that here. But I really appreciate what you have done, honestly, for this. And I think we ought to call on you more to get more of an input of where we could be going from a planning side if we need to. It's just abundantly complicated. We know we need east-west and north-south transportation. We got rubber roads that are full, and that's really the way we get around. And we're not going to probably add a whole lot to some of those roads at this point in time. It's going to have any effect on us over the next 10 years. So we've got all of these other counties blossoming now that have the potential to do that. We're not looking at them. So you've steered some of this, I know, from all the way up the TMA side down to us. So if anybody has any questions of WIT about that from our planning side, here's a great chance to talk about it, because he's only presented just a little bit of all of this complexity that goes with this.
I'll let Cassandra jump in. She may have had a response to an earlier question you had.
What do we do in the next 1 to 3 years, right? So we look at this and we need to understand how those numbers were created, how the rankings were created, and what goes into that. And so the inputs are sometimes in our control. and how can we elevate some of these projects to maybe a higher level priority, or how can we bolster these projects to compete at the federal level. First and foremost, as Whit mentioned, the supporting network. So the supporting network has an incredible impact on the ridership and on these major corridors. So just like you do not live at the base of an interstate interchange and you get on, your driveway goes right onto the interstate, you get onto other roads. And so this is, I know sometimes you wish you would, but no, you really don't.
Sometimes you're glad it doesn't.
Yes, so this is all part of a network. This is the highest level of this network, and it is very fun to talk about, but the other levels of the network are what make this work. And so that is our job, is to look at the other levels of the network, and we're going to talk about that actually in a later presentation today, about how we start to look at that, and in coordination with the MPO. The other piece of this is where we put our investments within these corridors, because the travel demand model that is used and generates the ridership is looking at that background bus network, but it's also looking at the core services that we have in our network. And when we put more robust service on these corridors, that also elevates them. And so there are things that we can do now to influence the outcomes of this, understanding that this is also half of the equation. And I want to make that really clear, that the half of the equation is this technical ability of this project to compete. And then the other half is the financial ability for this, for each one of these projects to compete. So we have, yes, we have an idea.
If I can add
Yeah.
a little bit to that, within the next 1 to 3 years, and I don't have this presentation today, but I think I've shown it to you before, is a regional express bus network. And that is something that we hope T-BARTA can pick up that mantle and move it forward, or certainly PSTA and HART can operate those services. We've been talking with PSTA staff about the TIA to Clearwater Beach Express. That's one component of that. The realigned 100X, which would be certainly downtown St. Petersburg into downtown Tampa. The Veterans Corridor is another one. The I-275 corridor. So there's a lot of opportunity for regional express bus that could begin to demonstrate to the federal and state government that we have good ridership in our county. Right now, we can't really demonstrate that because the service that is provided regionally or cross county just isn't that great service, and it isn't garnering that much ridership. The other component that we can work on is land use. And particularly in the Gateway area, which you see as a hub for Pinellas County, we don't have to worry about downtown St. Petersburg too much. But in the Gateway area, we have a lot to worry about. And we are starting a master plan right now, and it is the first multi-jurisdictional master plan ever done in Pinellas County, from what I've been told. 4 local governments, each $100,000. DOT has gone beyond matching. We just asked them to match $500,000 we had. They've gone above that. We have a $1 million master plan that we're starting next month to really look at how do we get land uses and account for stormwater, resiliency, coastal high hazard, all the flooding stuff that happens in the Gateway area, to sustain that as our economic engine. And we have a lot of surface parking lots there, and frankly, if we're going to run transit down there, I have a lot of worry about the drive automobile-oriented development pattern. So we need to work on that. And frankly, if we can work on that and show this master plan, the federal government takes a look at that, they can say, aha, you guys are readying yourself for this investment. We're going to give you a higher rating because we see the linkage between land use, economic development, and redevelopment. Right now, that's hard to see in the Gateway area. And frankly, it's hard to see in the West Shore area. We need to work on both those areas.
So is that the Forward Pinellas that's working on that?
We are leading that master plan, yes. And thanks to the county for $100,000 and the cities for each putting in $100,000 for that study. So the last point I want to make is just the Howard Franklin Bridge, which I think is important. 2 months ago, we thought, or even a month ago, frankly, we thought we were going to have to build a 3rd bridge if we ever wanted light rail or commuter rail in this region. DOT, about 2 weeks ago, sent out an email and called me and said, you know what, we came up with something new, yet again, And now we have 2 express lanes being built in each direction. So that's 4 express lanes. They will be probably tolled lanes, probably variable priced in response to congestion. And what they have said is that one of these piers will be strengthened to support a commuter rail or light rail type of technology. And then if we agree to do that, they would then build on the existing southbound span, which will become the northbound span, a wider bridge to add 2 of those express lanes over there and converting one of those express lane segments into a light rail or something for fixed guideway. This is unprecedented. This will be built starting in 2020, completed by about 2023. For DOT to set the table like this for us, I wouldn't have predicted it a year ago. And so we've really come a long way with the change in leadership in District 7. And my hat's off to them, if I ever wear a hat. And I'm really excited that we have a partner now as opposed to an agency that kind of sits back there and wags a finger at you. So I think it's very encouraging to see the department coming to the table. But none of this really happens. I mean, the bridge will get built and the express lanes will get built, but the light rail and all that stuff won't happen if we don't have a local commitment at some point. And that's really all I have today for you, and appreciate any other questions.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
We all read in the paper and seen through other vehicles that Amazon is looking for a second location for a regional headquarters. And Pinellas County, or I guess really the Tampa Bay region, has committed to try to put together a plan for that. But one of the key criteria is that we have a transportation network that will allow for that kind of major employment. I think there's something in the area of 50,000 people. So we're short on that. We're weak on that. And even though we put together a plan for this particular thing, that's a long shot. But there are others that might come subsequently, and we need to be ready for that in the future. How do we? The biggest problem that we faced with Greenlight Pinellas was that most of the people did not perceive that it would benefit them, and they didn't feel that it was something that should have a high priority. And Hart has experienced similar problems with their plans. If we do it on a regional basis, will that enable us to have a stronger element of necessity in the mind's eye of the voters that will allow for that?
I think that's a great question. My observation is that county alone referendums for this kind of thing have a hard time because there's just, it doesn't really, particularly in Pinellas, it doesn't really satisfy what people really want to use the system for. They want to get to the airport, they want to get to major employment opportunities, they want to get to major events across the bay, and my goodness, if the Rays were to make a decision to leave Pinellas County and go to Hillsborough County, that's another reason to sort of link all these things together. So I think, there's a lot of moving pieces and all that, but I think the public has to really see how they benefit. And one of the messages, I think, and this doesn't resonate in every community I found, a lot of folks don't want any growth and they've got theirs and they're happy with that. But if we don't replace the population that's here today with younger workers, and Pinellas County is a great example of that, our average workforce for the county is something north of 45 years old. I mean, not the average age. This is the average first-time employee to Pinellas County is 45 years old. Like the new worker. We're hiring a bunch of old people. And no offense, because I'm over 45. We need to start looking at ways to attract younger workers, to retain high school students in Pinellas County who want to stay in this community, give them an opportunity to stay in this community. And that means better transportation to connect where the employment centers are. Safety Harbor is an attractive place to live because it's easy to get to Tampa, where the higher paying jobs are. Oldsmar is an attractive area to get to because there are high paying jobs in Oldsmar. I mean, in the gateway, and we just need to work on that. And I think that message needs to be reinforced and communicated. People on the beaches may not care about that, but I think most everybody else in Pinellas County will care about economic gain and economic opportunity, and that just needs to be central to the message. I haven't figured out exactly what that message is, but we've got some time to work on it. But you're absolutely right.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity and a time to be working on this stuff, and I'm hoping we can get out of our own way and do it.
Me too. Thank you very much. And Cassandra will talk a little bit about our long-range transportation plan and the community bus plan, but there's some complementary things that tee us up for this decision to be made. I'll stick around if there are questions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. We need to look at the, yes.
Let me just add one thing. You know, as I've been going around and to the community and presentations, and I think all of you probably have too, you know, there's lots of questions, and lots of the PSTA board members have asked me, so like, what is this new T-BARTA, or what is this supposed to do? We have a brand new board member from Tarpon Springs, and he asked me what T-BARTA is, because there's never been a person from Tarpon Springs on T-BARTA, to my knowledge. And my own wife had me ask that question, and we see these articles in the paper, and you know, basically, I feel like we all have the option to go two different ways. You can keep questioning, and they don't have any money, and some people say they maybe don't have a purpose, or we can try to come up with a purpose, or figure out a way that we might be able to direct them in a positive way. And I just want to, I think WIT does a fantastic job of as you were saying, Commissioner, sort of all these different things. The TMA, T-BARTA. I mean, let's figure out a way that they can move the ball forward. The Tampa Bay Partnership is trying to do that with T-BARTA. And one little thing that's going to happen next Friday is the T-BARTA board is going to meet, and this is only their third, the new improved T-BARTA board, is going to meet next Friday and have like a little mini workshop of some sort. And they've asked that we go and present 2 weeks from now. No, 1 week from now. They go and we present our Central Avenue BRT project. Really more as a favor to them, because they want to highlight that, as Whit showed, that even though it's just in Pinellas County, it's not that it doesn't meet the definition of going across a county line, that it's part of the regional transportation plan, and it's the one and only of the 55 attempts to get funded and move forward. And T-BARTA sees that as an opportunity, if they could sort of ceremoniously, officially adopt that as part of their regional plan, as a help sort of solidifying what their role might be in the future. So we're happy to do that. I think, you know, they've also got an ask up in the legislature to see if they can get some operating funding to continue. And so what role does PSTA have to play? I think we can be supportive. We can be creative and supportive of finding ways in which this idea of looking at regional transportation helps us, or at least helps us in the future.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to
Okay.
approve the minutes for August 16th.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then the meeting schedule for 2018 is in your packet. I guess we have to approve that.
We just approved this in the Finance Committee meeting. These are the same meeting dates, I believe, that we've traditionally met on. So I would move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So can we go back to I know it gets out of hand sometimes, but trying to do joint presentations for people that,
Yeah.
so that you're not doing the same thing over and over and over?
Yeah,
All
definitely.
different, I mean, especially when they're back to back like that?
Definitely, and really this presentation is, I'll just quickly say a few words, because most of you saw me at the end of the Finance Committee do this, do my piece, so I won't go through it.
Schedule, actually.
Oops. But I just want to kind of introduce the next agenda item that's on your list beyond the ridership analysis, which is to kick off a planning study, which this is the planning committee, so the planning committee decides the planning stuff. And but there's been a lot of questions raised by the finance committee about our ridership trends, and so that's why I gave that presentation sort of impromptu at the end of the meeting an hour ago. But it really was directed at you guys. The idea is that our ridership has been declining over the last really 2 years, and there's been lots of national analysis about why transit ridership is declining at almost every single transit system in the world, and why that is. And there's been lots of explanations of gas prices being historically low, the economy improving, more people buying cars, Uber and Lyft having an impact, all sorts of different things. Some areas, and I think maybe this is having an effect in maybe St. Petersburg, property values growing in our urban areas is pricing out younger, more mobile, more maybe transit-friendly people, workers, to have to move to less transit-friendly areas to afford their housing. All those factors weigh in. As I presented, our ridership drop seems to be focused on what I would describe as discretionary riders, not the transportation disadvantaged, which are low-income folks who rely on us and have no other choice are riding us more. Our services, they need us, and they are riding us more. And we're not really losing those folks. We are seemingly having ridership declines in people that have choices. Maybe they're riding Uber and Lyft, maybe they're not riding, maybe they've moved. I don't know. There are a few transit systems across the country that are bucking this trend somewhat, and they've actually seen ridership increases. Those are systems that have redesigned their bus network to concentrate service on the key corridors of their community and focus there while maybe providing other options for areas that they don't serve. PSTA has been down this road before. In 2012 and 2013, some of you, some PSTA board members were here. We did a community bus plan that then became part of Greenlight, and the board adopted a plan to focus services on the core routes. But then, because we are made up of a board of mostly elected officials, when it came time to eliminate low productive routes, we didn't do it. We largely did not do it. We also didn't really have, I think, good options for those folks that came to the PSTA board meetings and went to the podium and said, we need your service. And I think some of those things have changed. So with that, let me introduce Cassandra to kind of talk about what we are about to embark on, a planning study to maybe go at that in a better way.
So you've really gotten a lot of big vision, then some of the issues that we're having, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do to solve it? So I guess this is not to combine presentations. So one of the things that we do 3 times a year is look at our routes, and we look at them at a very detailed level. We do this route analysis and make adjustments to make sure that the system is working. We're from a larger perspective, we're also looking at these areas that have completely redesigned their service. Examples like Houston and Jacksonville did this about a year ago, and they're seeing their ridership stabilize or increase because they've put their funding into their core service, so they're doing the most good for the most people who are riding their service, and those people are riding more. From the presentation that Brad just gave, you see when we put service on the weekends during our service increase in February of last year, we're getting substantial ridership increases on those routes that had the service increases. But we were very focused on doing well, let's make it do better. We're also going to be looking at what happens in Tallahassee. They've also gone to this core network, and Hart just did that. Now, they had some other issues that forced them to make some service changes, but their focus was, let's put our resources into those core routes, and that does mean that a lot of people will have better service, but some people will not. In addition to that, as Whit mentioned, we'll be looking at updating that community bus plan, but in the context of the long-range transportation plan. So last time we did this, we did our community bus plan, and we handed it to the MPO as the transit element of the LRTP. This time, we would like to co-brand those plans, having all of the public engagement done together, making sure that the public understands that this is part of our transportation network and integrated together. So these are some of the things that we do on a very detailed level of looking at our route by route. How is the ridership going? Is the service on time? Do we need to make adjustments there? Are we having some segments that are doing really well of a route, and then there's another piece that's dropping the overall productivity of that route? And how can we make changes just to that piece? And then when we also look at those stops, is where are people transferring? So if we make an improvement to one route and there a lot of people are transferring to another route, we want to make sure that we're making improvements on both those so people can still make their connections. When we decide that we want to have some kind of significant change on a route, or we think that based on our data that this would be a good idea, we then go out and ride that service. Our public engagement team goes out for about a week. For some routes, they've surveyed every single run on a route for a week. So it's a very intensive time for them, but I think it gives us some really good data about routes. And then before we make the change, we also take a look at what did the system look like for the community bus plan. So are we in line with the plan that we have for the system? So I'm going to walk through a couple of examples of what we've done for this upcoming service change. We've been looking at these routes for a while. I'm going to talk about the Route 444, which is a circulator in Pinellas Park, and the Route 58, which is focused on commuter service for the 118th Bryan Dairy Corridor. So for the 444, this has historically been our lowest performing route. We have discussed the elimination of this route several times, and the last time we talked about this with the board, you all asked us to come back with some significant alternatives for these folks. When we took the survey for this was in February of this year. So the data that I have in this presentation is very much focused on that February. The anecdotal data is from February. The average daily ridership in February of 2017 was just over 15, so about 16 people. That's based on the survey. The data that we have today showing it that ridership has dropped to about 9 or 10, between 9 and 12 a day. Most of these trips are for shopping. People aren't riding all week long. They're choosing 1 or 2 days to ride and do some shopping trips. They're going to the Pinellas Park Transit Center. Some are transferring. Others are trying to get to the Walmart on US 19. We did change this route in 2016, right at the end of 2016. We were looking at Crystal Lakes Manor, which was at the southern end of the service, and we found that if we could move the Route 11 into that community, we could give them better service, more frequent service all day long, but then also Saturday service, and this would be at a lower cost. And so we did that, and you can see that a significant amount of the ridership was coming from that community, and now that community has better service for a lower cost to us, except we didn't eliminate this route. This route costs us about $160,000 a year to run. The cost for us to provide the ride is just under $54. That's regardless of how people pay, that's just the cost to us, not the return. This is more than 10 times what our system-wide cost per ride, which is under $5, and our best routes are operating at under $3. So that's a considerable amount of money for not a lot of return. There are also alternatives in this area for these folks. And there is an opportunity to use that $160,000 to improve the alternatives, which again improves the service for this area, but also improves it for everyone along that route. So some of our best routes in our entire system, the 52 and the 34, are overlapping this route. If we can take those funds from the 444 and put it into improvements on other routes, we could not only serve the people in this area, but again, serve a greater good. So they are, and these routes are running at 20 minutes, a half an hour. I mean, they're really good. The 444 is running at a 2-hour service. We also have our Direct Connect. The last time we had talked about this, that was just starting. It was a pilot project just in this area. Now it's county-wide, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we plan to expand that. And of course, we have some other services in this area, DART and Neighborly Care. The Direct Connect service has gained traction in Pinellas County, and it is a nationally recognized way to lower the cost of first mile, last mile services. So we are doing something that nobody else has figured out, and we're doing it pretty well. In fact, we plan to expand the service to eliminate these zones. So again, we're experimenting with these alternatives to see how they best provide the connections to our system, and we're making improvements to it every single year. In fact, sometimes several times a year. And I really feel like the reason that this is getting national attention is not only because we're the first in the nation to have agreements with transportation network companies, but we are moving at the pace of the technology in the industry, meaning we are making improvements months, not years. We have an evolution of our services. The other route that we talked about, was a lower performer in our system, is the Route 58. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
If you may, and this is a very simplistic question, but would you just one more time, I'm all the way back at 16 daily rides.
Right.
Can you just define, I've read that constantly, I just want to make sure I clearly understand what that means in this presentation.
Right.
What does that mean?
That means a rider gets on that service 16 times a day. Somebody gets on the bus.
So if they go to Walmart.
Rider. So if they go to Walmart and they come back,
that's 2 rides.
that's 2 rides.
And that is from a time period, it says daily. Is that, what time does that route run? Do you recall?
It runs like
9 to
somewhere
14.
about like 9 to 5. It's one driver, one bus, all day. But it's very much a shopping. It's not a commuter service. So it is very much a 9 to 5 kind of
Just
service.
out of curiosity,
Yeah.
what do we know about the riders or the ridership on that route? And do we know that about the rest of the ridership on the other routes, or do we know more or less about the ridership on this? This is a general question that helps me as
Right.
we go forward.
I think we know about what data we get for all of the routes, meaning we know what the ridership is, we know where people get on because of our technology. We know where people are transferring because we do surveys periodically about that. But we know a lot about the riders and what they're using the service for from onboard surveys. So we may not know a lot about the multitude of markets that ride the 52 because we haven't done a specific onboard survey. I think it would be very difficult to do 100% survey on that route because it's a very crowded route. So we would have to take a more sampling of that. In this case, because the ridership is so low, our staff was able to talk to every single person that rode that route that week that we surveyed. So we know as much as they'll tell us, but we think we know a lot about what they're using it for. Anything to add?
Yeah, you have, I think if you advance, you have, there's a schedule.
Yeah. So 8:55 to 5:40.
So according to that route and that schedule, you have perfect information on the ridership on this route.
Well, I would never say anything is perfect.
No, well, statistically,
You know,
we would call that, statistically, it
yes,
would be perfect.
statistically, we have talked to every single rider for that week that we took the survey, yes.
Crazy route.
Yeah.
That's a crazy route.
Yeah, not only that, but that really means, oh, I'm sorry.
Do we know where those riders got on? For instance, when I was riding it, the St. Pete Housing Authority, the bus driver said, sometimes I go weeks without taking anybody there. Is that still that kind of
Yeah, so
service?
the highest ridership stops are the Pinellas Park Transit Center, which makes sense, and the Walmart. The vast majority of people who are using this service are going to the Walmart. We have talked to some riders who came into the Pinellas Park Transit Center by another route and then transferred to the 444 so that they could get a direct front door service, because this particular service goes to the front door. So when we look at this, the Route 34 stays on US 19. The Route 444 goes into the parking lot and drops off at the front door. And so there are people who would wait for this service. That's another problem that we have to talk to WIT about, and it's something that the track has addressed through its pedestrian safety letter, is how are we designing the connection between transit services and the front door of where people are headed. And that's a land use issue, and so we're going to raise it as an issue and then pitch it to our friends here.
And then we'll work with all the cities in the county.
Yes.
It all goes downhill.
Right.
So if I could take what you're saying, we're saying that 8 people a day go from the transportation center to Walmart and then come back. So that's the 16 people that we're talking about per day on that route.
That is a possibility on any given day that
Yeah.
is true.
Okay, so that's,
And that would be a good day, because
Yeah.
I think it's dropped to like 9.
Yes.
So it's well like 4.
But we did this at the beginning of the calendar year, and now we're at the end of the calendar year, and even though we haven't gone back out for an onboard survey, our numbers are coming back as smaller. But let me get to the other thing, because this is where our opinions have changed. The Route 58 is a completely different kind of route, and when we had the economic downturn in 2008, it was cut in half. Guess what? The ridership dropped in half. That kind of makes sense, right? These are people who are using the service for work. They're using it 5 days a week. They're using it as much as possible to get to and from their workplace. However, because of the schedule, it is not matching up with the schedules of the employment in that area. So they have some interesting shifts, and our onboard survey sort of identified that for us, that people were telling us they either have to ask to get off early in order to catch the last bus of the day, or they have to find an alternative. So what that means is those people who have a shift that ends at 8 o'clock can't take our service. So they were asking for, I just need one more bus. I just need one more run for you to do, and I will be able to take the bus to work and back. Which means for those people, we were losing the other half of their trip. And we just had to give them a little bit more, and we could have their full round trip.
And in the community bus plan, this is like the biggest employment corridor in the county. So,
Right.
yeah.
So even though it's
Or
a,
will be at least.
and the
If it's not
ridership
here.
is pretty stable in comparison to what our system is showing. So there have been ridership declines, but it's not as steep as the system as a whole. People are connecting to other routes, but half of them are just taking this one. So that means that this route is pretty critical to them. In comparison, this is probably the, it's still near the bottom of productivity routes, but in comparison, the cost per ride is not quite as bad as the other example that we saw earlier at just $9. So it's a little, about twice the system average. And there aren't that many alternatives. So if we did eliminate this, it would be a very difficult usage of our system. Now, they could use Direct Connect to better connect into another route, but they'd have to go take an east-west route and then maybe have to take our Direct Connect on both ends. So there is a possibility that we could go ahead and accommodate this requested change and test it out and see how much does the ridership increase with just that one change. So this is
What time does it stop now?
it stops at about 7:30. It's like right before 8 o'clock is where it hits the middle part of where the employment is. So on 118th, the people who said they wanted an extra trip, it was stopping just before 8 o'clock. So this is a conversation for us to have, not just on a regional level or even the community bus plan system-wide level, but it will be an experimentation at a route-by-route level. When we make significant changes to routes, which means that we change over 25% of the service, that becomes a different kind of public engagement and a different conversation with the board than when we make small changes. So although we have small changes that we do 3 times a year, it's only the ones that are significant that rise to the level of the board. But this kind of change of making hard decisions about how to best use the dollars that we have is going to be a good 12 to 18 month discussion with the board. So we could go ahead and start experimenting with smaller pieces of the route before we go ahead and completely redesign the entire system in one fell swoop.
Okay. So we're talking about next year for a big redesign.
We would have a redesign plan developed, and then we would implement
And then you try to get the best that works.
it. Fair enough.
I hear
Yeah.
you.
In addressing that point, when we presented this before, I don't think we had the clarity of the cost per ride on the 444. So that's a new point. It's also a new point that we have the alternative, the Direct Connect. So the question I have is, why are we waiting until February? Or when would we take this to the board to say we're not being fiduciary responsibly to our community on this route? What was it, February, the regular route change, or were you going to be doing this in December or November?
We make these kinds of changes 3 times a year. According to our union contract, we do our service changes. It helps us in a number of ways. One, it plans for the operators that are going to run the service and where they're going to be in the system. And then also is good for riders and information, making sure.
The
that-
earliest this could be done is February of 2018.
Yeah.
It cannot be done earlier than that.
Yeah.
But I'm not convinced we can get it done by February because we've tried. And we have not done the necessary community outreach in Pinellas Park with the residents who will come to the board meeting. And they need to understand the Direct Connect program and how they can get to the Walmart in a reasonable way. Our representative from Pinellas Park needs to, I feel,
We need to be
understand
able-
it.
We need to be able to support our Pinellas Park representative.
Yeah.
Which I think we are with the Direct Connect and some of the other options. But there are some, the loop around there through the mainlands, there was, I think, at least when I was writing this, there was one person that typically would get on the bus, transfer at Pinellas Park, and go down to volunteer in a nursing home. And then she would ride back at the end of the day. And that was the only one that went through that loop on a regular basis. The other people from the mainlands were coming out because they were saying, we don't trust a cab driver to pick us up and not tell his buddy that nobody's home so that it would come steal from my house. Whereas we trust the bus driver.
Right.
Well, I don't know quite, I mean, that's the kind of thing that was there, which I think is what you're talking about, Brad, in telling them the story.
And I doubt that the number of Uber rides in the mainlands exceeds 10 in the history of the mainlands. I don't know. It's not their target audience. Yeah,
But
we have to be strategic about this.
My question is sort of piggybacking off of that, is what are our legal notice requirements and how do they preclude swift movement or changes to routes when financial issues dictate it?
Well, our requirement is we have to provide an opportunity for the public to comment. We can't just cut or reduce services in a substantial way without giving people an opportunity to comment. So we'll meet the minimum requirement, but the PSA board has directed us, and we want to do more than that, to actually talk to them about their different options that they have. Because, as Bill said, I mean, we didn't show the cost. The $50 a trip that it's costing us is something significant. And even if there is fiduciary responsibility that the PSA board has as well, and we can take that money and get a lot more than 9 riders a day if we invest that in another route that maybe is in Pinellas Park. So I think we just need some time to get that word out and maybe have a different outcome.
Well, I think things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, great.
Got one more quick thing I just want to, Heather, do
Continuation. Okay.
have prize you on.
Good, still morning for 2 more minutes. Okay, I'll try to make this quick. So this presentation is about our Transportation Disadvantaged Late Shift program, and that program is a grant-funded program that provides 25 free rides a month on Uber or United Taxi between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. for people who are working some of the lower wage jobs here in our county in the 2nd and 3rd shifts. We're bringing this to you today to provide you an update on what has been a successful first year, and then also to let you know that we're looking at ways to sustain the program when the grant funding ends, potentially in June of 2018. And so one of those ways is to charge a copay to our transportation disadvantaged customers for these additional 25 on-demand trips. Part of this program, this is just a little aside, is that we also provide people with one urgent on-demand trip during the day for people who use the bus to and from work but maybe have an emergency. So the late shift program, we've heard some really great things from some of the program participants. We've heard that they are now able to take additional shifts, so maybe they can increase their total household income. They're able to take new shifts. And then also, they are feeling a lot safer because they don't have to walk home at 2 or 3 in the morning. They can wait inside, especially those who are using Uber, because the app tells them when the driver is riding. And so we have those kind of really feel-good successes with our customers for this program. The CTD required that we look at some performance measures, so we're looking at, can we provide a lower cost trip than we do for a traditional door-to-door TD trip? And we also are responding to the on-demand request in a timely manner, so less than 20 minutes was the measure. We are succeeding in all of these measures. Our average cost of a trip is about $14, lower than our TD cost. What really brings that down is those Uber trips, because they are about almost $12 compared to almost $16 for a taxi. So it's a pretty big difference. And then our response time, both are under the measure of 20 minutes, but the Uber trips are averaging about 5 minutes for someone to get a pickup.
So why are we not making everybody use Uber if the United is so much more?
There are some participants that don't have a smartphone or maybe don't have a data plan for their phone, so they may not be able to order an Uber trip through an app. So that actually brings us, well, we'll jump ahead to that in just a moment. Just a couple other measures. So we have been working very hard to get people to transfer to Uber. So we've created some online tutorials about how to use the app. So if there was a barrier that prevented someone from using it, we have that information. We work with people over in our mobility management group. They'll actually show someone how to use it on their phone and work with them on that. We have been increasing our share of Uber trips, so they're at about 43% of the total trips now. But in terms of that sustainability, one of the things that we included in our next grant and got some funding for was to have a call center type function overnight, so someone could call in and then using an iPad, someone could book a trip for them with Uber. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at offering a premium monthly package for our TD customers who currently pay $11 for their 31-day pass, where they could pay $20 and get 25 on-demand late-night trips, one urgent day trip, and their bus pass for one Covey, which we think is still a really good deal. The average usage is about 15 trips per month that people are using the program. A little more on Uber than Lyft, but it's about 15. I mean, Uber than United.
What's the difference between the sustainability program at $20 and the $11?
Well, I was looking at sustaining the program beyond the grant. So because we don't charge anything now, it was a way to have the rider pay something.
Right now,
for these
every single
trips.
transportation disadvantaged customer, all 5 or 6,000 of them, every time they go get their bus pass, they get all these free Uber rides at night.
Yeah.
And then starting January 1, theoretically, they will give a choice. It's like an upgrade. They can get a premium, like buying HBO or something. You can get a premium if you want free Uber rides. Well, they're not free. You pay to the 20 instead of 11.
So basically, then we would be subsidizing between $4 and $6 or a trip. $3 and $6, I guess. Which is consistent with our Direct Connect program where we subsidize the first $5 of a trip. And that is actually the end of my presentation. We just wanted to, like I said, give you an update and let you know kind of what was coming, because we may hear from some people about the additional charge. And we expect that to happen in January.
So it's running out already?
We continue to grow the program where we're providing almost 5,000 trips a month. And so it's exceeding our monthly allocation.
But the state, the funding that the state TD program is using to fund this grant and some other grants across the state was only 2 years worth of funding that the legislature approved. So unless the legislature comes up with more money, there's a strong likelihood we won't get this grant again after next June 30th. So then we already told the state that the state approved this plan to keep this program going once the grant runs out. Now, we're going to go to Tallahassee, and it's part of our specific asks, because we think this has been so successful, that we'd like the TV Commission to agree to kind of keep the program going within maybe even existing sources in some way. So, we're hopeful, but
So we've been too successful.
yeah.
I apologize that I may have misheard this. I wrote down January in 2018, but it's June in 2018.
Well, no.
January is when we're looking at implementing the changes. We could have done it, as early as August, but we wanted to think it through, make sure we notify people and, get the word out.
The funding part of it is the June.
Correct.
Right.
Correct, but we have about 300 unique individuals that were participating in the program just this past June, so we really, we don't want to have the program just go away for those people who have come to rely on
You
it.
have 300 in it now, and you have 6,000 that were.
About 5,000 trips a month.
There are 6,000 people,
People that-
low-income Pinellas County citizens that could technically use it, but lots of those people don't have jobs then. They have jobs during the day.
So if we
there are-
open it up to the full group after the 300, we increase rather significantly.
It's open now. It's open now.
It is open.
It's
They just
only
don't work day to
300.
night.
That
Or taking it.
have late night demands.
Right.
But all 6,000 have access to this now?
Yes, they do,
They
and we
could.
advertise it to them.
Okay, I misunderstood then. So I thought it was just the late night, it was just the 300 tests, but it's not. It's all 6,000 have it now.
They have access to it, yes, and 300 was just 1 month. There's actually some turnover in the program. People take jobs, they lose jobs, they get new jobs, so we don't see the same 300 people. If I looked at the whole year, I'm sure we see much more people that have taken advantage of it.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And, do we have any future meetings that we're?
Not that I can think of further we want to talk about. Yeah, you'll be seeing probably more about this bus plan redesign, some more information about our outreach, especially in Pinellas Park.
Great. Okay.
If needed, can I make a comment about future meetings?
Yeah.
I would certainly like to see more of that, because obviously we have things changing. You mentioned that before. You just came back from your big study, I'm sure, the meeting that you went to where we're really looking at how everyone's doing. And you mentioned how ridership is going down in particular areas, and how some are looking at the corridors and looking at the internal parts of that. And I think we really, maybe could also help us figure out what areas that we could look at or read about or check on, but perhaps presentations from you would be incredibly helpful about that. For example, when we look at this Route 444, I know people that are in my community whose jaws would fall all the way to the ground when they heard about this. That kind of, they've been talking about that before, but, how come we don't see people on the buses? They'll say to me, and I say, well, I don't know, how often do you look at the buses? I really don't know. And what bus, we have all different kinds of different routes, so which route are you looking at, which one are you talking, well, they didn't know, et cetera, but here's an example that is pretty eye-opening to us. So from the
Yeah.
planning side, I appreciate it. Maybe there's some struggles within PSTA of how do we handle that, or maybe it's too uncomfortable to even have to try to think about dealing with it because of what's happened in the past when you try to change a route, et cetera. But this route obviously has some issues. And obviously, I think everybody I'm going to assume.
I think it's up to us to support those changes when we have all the information. See, what happens is they go through all this study, and they bring it back to the board, and there's 3 people in the audience that make a stink about making that change, and the board gets nervous and says, maybe we better wait, or, and
We
it's
have-
costing us money when we do that.
Yeah.
We had
Trust
more
us a lot of
people
money.
at the board meeting complaining about the dropping in the 4-4-4 than we had
Riding.
riding the bus
Riding.
in a week.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right,
So,
so we.
Well, yeah, and they
we've gotta-
make a good pitch, because they get up there and they, you know, they need it. They don't have a car or,
But we fixed.
But now we have direct.
Not-
We
you know,
fixed
we have options.
Crystal Manor too, which was a
Yeah.
big part of it.
Yeah.
Some of the people coming from the nursing homes were complaining about it, but they don't use it
Right.
because they have.
Because they have TD
bus-
anyway.
and they have their,
That's like the mainlands too. That's what they say. They want the opportunity to use it, even if they never actually will use it.
Well, the bottom line is we can't afford that.
the other
Right.
option might be to tell the mainlands, well, if you want to pay for the service, we'll be happy to run the service.
yeah.
So my input, if I may then, and she's supporting that right now, is bring it, I mean, I bring some of it onto us. I think we need to step up to the plate and be helpful. Because that's just really tough.
Yeah.
That's tough to stomach, that
We
kind
can't be
of.
wimpy about
Not that.
making the changes.
Yep. So make us.
We can be sensitive without being
Yeah,
wimpy.
we want to be sensitive. We
Yeah.
want to have your same degree of sensitivity to the folks, but there's a point. I mean, what happens if it was $150 instead of $54?
Right.
Well, like, as Heather presented, I feel
It's probably
we
more.
could give them free Uber rides, and it would be
Yeah.
cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, when,
Exactly.
at what point should you, or should this planning group be saying, whoa, is it 200, 150, 54, 33? I don't know.
If Brian's right.
Or it's
we
not
could
just
send them on
numbers.
Uber cheaper than we can send the bus around
And-
all day long.
And it kind of goes to the policy of the board, and that's the article that I forwarded to you. Did you forward that to the rest of the board?
We did.
It talked about Houston, it was in
Yeah.
Governing Magazine, and it's the policy decision in which way to stand on the bow of the ship and have the board collectively say, we want to go this way, we want to, and maybe it's going to the thing that we heard about today, which is the more frequent routes, investing on those, which are going to attract land use changes, which are going to make the bus system even more effective, which is going to affect more people coming and populating around those routes, which is going to make it maybe successful for us to upgrade to a different kind of service.
The one thing though, all the list of those cities, they have boards of appointed officials, non-elected officials, businessmen and women from the community that are not responsive, they're not as responsive to the citizens. And we don't, right? Jacksonville, Houston, Tampa, they have a different board. And that's okay. We have always been very responsive to the citizens who need us. And
Respectfully, if it's about the message, if we had this message back then,
oh, I agree.
I think we would have, it was a split decision by
We
the
would have
board.
changed it a couple of years ago.
And I think we would have been far more successful. Because you have to help the person that's representing that community to say, hey, I can't stop this avalanche. It's not something that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
We'll talk about more later.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we are adjourned.
Yep, good to see you.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening.
It work?
We're
Or
combined.
did he get it on your
No, I
computer?
quit and combined, with who combined.
Just listen, you're with me.
No. I didn't see it.